Welcome into Conscious Conversations. I'm your host, Nick Palladino King, with my co host, Nitin Garg. Today we have a very, very special guest, Swami Sarvapriya Ananda. He is the minister in charge and the spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York. Swamiji, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us and to join our audience.
Thank you for having me, Nick, Nitin.
Well, great. Before we get going, we'd love to learn a little bit about you, some of your story and journey that's gotten you to the place that you are now as a spiritual leader. And then after that, have us lead us through an opening meditation or grounding session before we dive into Vedanta and consciousness and oneness, and also wherever this conscious conversation is going to take us today. So, Swamiji, take it from here and let us know a little about yourself and who you are.
Well, I'm a monk of the Ramakrishna order, and I've been a monk for the last 30 years. So how I got there was I grew up in a small city, which is no longer very small at all. It's on the eastern seaboard of India. It's a city called Bhubaneswar. It's the capital of one of the eastern states of India called Orissa. So I grew up there. My parents were close to the Ramakrishna mission ashrama there in Bhubaneswar. They were regular meditators. They used to study Vedanta, and we had books. So you have to remember, this is a time well before the internet, well before cable television. So all we had were books, and I was a bit of a bookworm. And we had lots of books on spirituality, especially Swami Vivekananda, Vedanta. And I grew up reading all that and visiting the ashram. And very soon it struck me powerfully that if this is true, what these books are saying, that there is an ultimate reality, call it God or what you will, and it can actually be experienced. And that is the goal or the ultimate purpose of life. If all this is true, this is what I would like to do. Why pursue anything else? I mean, if I looked around at my parents or uncles and aunts all around us, if I pursued the other way of life, this is what I would expect. A little better, a little worse. But if I did this, it seemed to promise something extraordinary. And so I decided that as soon as I was able, I would become a monk. And not that being a monk is essential for being spiritual, but if you don't want to do anything else at all, and if your circumstances permit, it's good to be a monk. Just be one-pointed have a one-track spiritual pursuit. So I decided to be a monk. In 1994, I finished my education, and finished education is not the right way to put it. But anyway, I got my degrees, and immediately I joined a Ramakrishna ashram that's in Deoghar, in another eastern state of India, which is now called Jharkhand. At that time, it was part of a bigger state called Bihar. And that's how I became a monk. And I have been a monk for the last 30 years, mostly in and around our main monastery in Belur, near Calcutta, on the bank of the Ganga. And then more recently in the United States, since the end of 2015, I was in the Vedanta Society of Southern California, which is in Hollywood, believe it or not. and after that, I have been in New York since January 2017. So that's how I'm here.
Well, that's great. And I love what you just said. Maybe we can unpack it after the meditation of you saw people around you having a life and you thought you could have done a little better or a little worse, but yet you chose to go after something much more legendary, it sounds like. So let's get into that after we do an opening meditation and we get grounded and ready for the conversation.
All right. This is a stilling meditation. You can just sit straight but not rigid. And when we feel comfortable, we can close our eyes and just be still, be alert and just still, physically still, and turning our attention inwards. Inner stillness. We stop talking to ourselves internally, stop and push out thoughts. Feelings are neutral, not remembering anything, not seeing, not trying to understand anything, not waiting for anything, not even expecting anything, just still, quiet, serene. And we become aware of awareness itself. As the body becomes still, as we shut down the senses, as feelings become neutral, as thoughts and expectations subside into stillness, we become aware of ourselves as awareness, just bare awareness. And we turn to the breath. Notice the in-breath and out-breath for half a minute. Don't interfere with the breath. Let the in-breath come as long as it will. Let it change into the out-breath. Let the breath flow out as it will. And when we are comfortable, take a deep breath in and hold. Just so that one is not uncomfortable, hold to the extent maybe a count of 4 internally. That deepens the stillness. Let go when you are uncomfortable. And breathe in and hold. Absolutely still, breathless, no breath, still, just awareness. And let the breath go. Do this for another minute, breathing in and breathing out. Still, aware. When we are comfortable, we can gently open our eyes.
All right. Thank you, Swamiji. I'd love, there's so many things for us to talk about. I'd love for you to touch on that quote that you said, that you noticed your life could have been a little better, a little worse. And also there was something I found researching you, and I'll ask if it's true or not. It said your first desire was to be a pilot, and your second desire was to know God. Is that true? And then if so, can you talk about what made you leave the realm of studying business and wanting to be a pilot and going in one direction towards God?
There's a story that's taken on a life of its own. That is not all that true. But it was just, I guess, a fascination with aeroplanes, which I still have. The desire to be a pilot, not much more than any little boy might want to fly planes. I never took any actual step towards becoming a pilot, but it is true. When I was a kid, I was fascinated with aeroplanes. I still remember writing on my school notebook goals in life. I think I was 10, all of 10 or 11 years old, or 12 maybe. And number 1 was pilot, and number 2 was find God. And then over time, I think over the next few years, the pilot thing disappeared as a realistic option, and the God thing solidified.
Can you tell us more about what that means of finding God?
Yes. It's an amazing thing. It's when we actually take a look around, and we read and we look at history, it's probably the most ancient quest of human beings. It's there in every culture, in every religion. Goes as far back as human history and beyond, I'm quite sure, even in prehistory. So there must have been mystics among cave dwellers, among the Stone Age people. I'm quite sure of that. I was reading in Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy, where he talks about the highest intuition of God as being, I am one with the divine, the Vedantic idea of I am Brahman, or you are that. And here, Aldous Huxley says that the general idea among scholars is that this is a later development. He says he doesn't agree. He says it's probably as old as humanity itself. Even before we had this history and civilization, long before that, there must have been mystics among the most ancient and most primitive of people who had this highest of mystical experiences. Yeah, the philosophies came later. The ways in which we find it, they have come more recently. So I found this in the books when I was growing up. Um, and it appealed to me. I guess there's something to the ancient Indian idea of samskaras, the tendencies which we bring in from past lives. So the reason why I took to it so quickly, and I was so fascinated by this one idea, even more than by aeroplanes, so that I really had no doubt at all that God does exist. I guess I really liked the idea. I never seriously doubted it. And um, the way Swami Vivekananda presented spirituality, I was never particularly interested in the rituals of religion. I was never particularly, even now, I'm not all that religious in that sense. But yes, spiritual quest, the quest for an ultimate reality, the quest for finding out who or what I am, and the promise that it held of finding deep and lasting meaning in life and fulfillment in life. All of those things appeal to me. And also, incidentally, the way it was presented as, I never found, it was presented as being rational, in consonance with science, not in conflict with the discoveries of science, not being narrow or fanatical or exclusive in any sense, in consonance with all modern values. So I never had any problem with the way Vivekananda presented spirituality. And I guess this is the old, um, the so a deep archetype of the person who sets off on a quest. Um, so it's as old as the Buddha's story of 2,500 years ago, the prince setting out on a quest to find, in his case, it was a deep solution to suffering. And not his suffering, he had no suffering at that point, but just human suffering, general suffering. Is there a solution to that? It goes even further back, as I discovered reading later on, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which predates Buddhism. You have the great Vedantin Yajnavalkya, who finally at the end of the Upanishad takes leave of his wives. He had two wives, and he divides his property between the wives, and one of them wants all the material property, and the other wife wants to know what is it that he is leaving the world for and becoming a monk. And so he tells her about the spiritual quest of self-realization. But down to our modern age, that it's still possible and it's happening right now. The story of Vivekananda, it appealed, the same story. Here's this young man in Calcutta, so close to our age, just over 100 years ago, who goes around asking people in his Calcutta was the metropolis, was the New York of 19th century India, I guess. It was the capital of the British Empire at that time in India, and an intellectual hotbed. So he goes around asking people, have you seen God? Not does God exist, or why do you believe in God? Have you seen God? A very empirical question, a question which is very suited to our age, I guess. And here is a person who goes out in pursuit of that, finds a spiritual master, and actually achieves God realization, enlightenment. And it says it is open to everybody. He says that if somebody says, I have seen God, and you cannot, do not believe him. But if somebody says to you, I have seen God, and so can you, then you can believe such a person. And so all of that made sense to me. But again, it's a matter of, I guess, samskaras, maybe from past lives, because it made sense to me. It was very fascinating for me. I had no resistance at all to these ideas, this pull. But that's not true of other young boys and girls my age. I didn't see anybody else becoming all that interested. Yeah.
Yeah,
Even
thanks for
even I
sharing.
can relate to that. As you were just sharing that experience, Swamiji, I can't say I have the same samskaras, but something similar started coming up more in my college years. I think I was more attracted to philosophy as a way of first inquiring, and then when that didn't satisfy the needs, I started investigating all the different religions. But there was this yearning for a deeper truth. So I could really relate to. It's
I
really great
think
to hear just your own story in that way.
I, I think you're right. And young people are idealistic and they are seeking meaning. But that seeking stops in the case of most people. And those who are lucky, they retain that sense of seeking for a deeper meaning. And that's why I've seen many people go into the fundamental sciences for that. Physics, for example, is Yes, there is an interest in physics, but also a need to understand the deepest secrets of the universe. Um, many people become interested in philosophy, and others. The thing is, our world doesn't um, expose people, young people, to the very possibility of spirituality, a genuine spiritual life. It's something that they have to discover for themselves over the years, and many people have this regret. Why didn't I know this earlier?
Mhm.
There are lots of people who aren't interested. Even if they knew it, they wouldn't have done anything differently. But there are many people who would have done things differently if they had known it early enough. Um, so anyway, right now here we are where we are, and in many ways we have access in a way which was not possible even 20-25 years ago, because thanks to this new technology and the new connectivity.
So it's so interesting you say that. As you're talking, I'm going, yeah, I stumbled into spirituality out of necessity. I was in so much suffering and stress from being in the corporate space that I literally stumbled into a yoga class, almost 20 years ago now. And I remember looking around and there was no men in the room. There weren't, and it was like, what is this? This is weird. And I really struggled with continuing to move forward on the spiritual path. So I appreciate you saying that. And there's a faith or a knowingness I've heard you talk about, of you just at some point you have faith that I don't know why I'm going this way, but I know this is where I'm supposed to be going. That's really helped me and served me when I've wanted to give up and wanted to turn off my spirituality and wanted to live more of a normal, quote unquote, life. So I really appreciate you sharing that this is something a lot of us do struggle with, and Nitin too yourself.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, yes, Nitin.
There's a question that's coming up for me, very related to this, that continues to really pound me, and I'm curious, what Vedanta says about that, and what Swamiji, with the great wisdom that you have, if you can help us shed some light on this. Is I often wonder, I heard you speak in one of the videos. You were talking about the purpose of life is God realization, the ultimate purpose of life. So yes, we may be seeking philosophy or through physics, ultimately we're trying to get to that ultimate reality. And I often wonder, if we were with God prior to this birth, if that's true, and if we're again going to be with God after this life is over, what is the fundamental purpose of going through this reality that we're in?
Yeah. Before I get into that, let me just talk a little more about the big picture. Um, that God realization, spirituality, all of this is real, and that it is available for all of us. And not only it's available and it's real, it's what we are all seeking in a broad sense, not one variety of spirituality, or just in a broad sense, spirituality and spiritual enlightenment, God realization, whatever you call it. This is what we are seeking, and this is real, and this is available. Just this much itself, people don't know. And it would really be of great help to people to know that. And one of our senior Swamis, Swami Ashokananda, who was in the Vedanta Society of Northern California up to the 1950s and 60s. So he was a great teacher of Vedanta, many books, and I grew up reading his books. One place he says, at that time, India had just become independent in the late 1940s. He was the Swami was in San Francisco. And in one of the talks, he said, the more I think about it, the more wonderful it seems to me that here is this culture, India, especially ancient India, which sets forth before all its people, as the goals of life, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Yes, pleasure and fun is something that people seek. Yes, success and wealth and power is something that people seek. But this has to be done on the basis of ethics and morality, dharma. But beyond all of these is something transcendental, something beyond this world, something beyond this little personal identity, something that's real. Call it God, Brahman, the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it. That such a thing is there, and such a thing is the goal of life. Moksha is a goal of life which is open to everybody. Just as you seek fun and success and power, just as you seek to be a good person in this world, so should one seek moksha, seek moksha, nirvana. This was an ancient, one of the major themes of Indian life, Indian civilization from the most ancient times. We have so many words for it: moksha, nirvana, kaivalya, whatever you call it. So this is a great thing. Even when you go to, especially India today, you see a tremendous sea change in India, vast amounts of material growth, material prosperity, ambition, greed, and seeking material success. But just to have this in the background, that beyond this material success, there's always something you can seek, a goal which will sustain you till the end of life and beyond, and which is something that the whole civilization values. That's a beautiful thing to have, even if the majority of people are not actively pursuing it at this moment in their lives. So yeah, that's the big picture.
And real quick, sorry to cut you off. When I first learned about the 4 desires of the soul, which is what I believe you're referring to, maybe 10 years ago, it set me free.
Yeah.
For really the first time, it set me free, because I was thinking for so long, oh, my dharma is to be a yoga teacher, and I was like, oh no, that's my artha. That's a tool. My dharma is different. My moksha is different. And for some reason, that framework set me free of so many pictures on the spiritual path. So it's been a foundational teaching for me, and I really, really love that you're bringing in the 4 desires of the soul, and that Hindu culture says have joy, make money, and have a purpose, and find God. It's such a beautiful framework of living. I've always loved it.
Right. More on that theme. Huston Smith, who was, by the way, a Vedantin, he wrote this classic book, Religions of the World, which became a textbook for comparative religion courses in universities in America. Religions of the World, Huston Smith. And he was a Vedanta student. His teacher was Swami Satprakashananda, who was the founder of the Vedanta Society in St. Louis. This was way back in the 1940s and 50s. So he says in his chapter on Hinduism that he was thinking such a vast and diverse and variegated religion. How do I introduce Hinduism? And then he said, it struck me. One way of putting it would be, Hinduism tells us you can have what you want. You will get what you want. But then that sounds kind of cool and very nice. But then you're confronted with, what is it that we really want? Then that's a very big question. And the more we ponder it, I'm reminded of somebody, it would be strange to quote in this context, Slavoj Žižek, he is a Hegelian Marxist professor, crazy guy. He says, happiness consists in dreaming of what we really don't want. So it's happiness, the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, he says, the exact words of the pursuit of happiness, there's a kind of hypocrisy. We spend, we dreaming of things which we really don't want. So what we want is a very big question. And if you push it, if you investigate it thoroughly and deeply enough, what we want is ultimately the spiritual. Nothing else will satisfy us. One of the Upanishads says, Yo vai bhuma tat sukham, that which is the infinite, that alone is happiness. Nalpe sukham asti, there is no real happiness in the limited. Which says something glorious about human nature. Our nature is such that we will not be satisfied with wealth, with power, with name and fame, with aesthetic enjoyments. All of those are great, but we will not be satisfied with that. We'll still want more. Will we ever be satisfied? And here is the beautiful answer. It's not just India. Every spiritual tradition in every civilization has the answer. The answer is yes. There is an answer to this question. Will we ever find deep, lasting peace, satisfaction? Yes, we will. And that's in spirituality, broadly defined. In every tradition, there is this. One will find fulfillment. So yeah, that's the big picture. And this is a message which everybody needs to hear. I think school children need to hear it when they are kids. Let it appeal to them when it will. Maybe immediately, maybe in 20 years' time, maybe next lifetime. But it's sad if people don't get to hear about it. Now, your question about we were with God, now we don't seem to be with God, and after death we will, or after enlightenment we'll find God. So what's the point of all of this? It's not really true in that sense that we were with God and now we are not, and then we will find God. If you look at Vedanta, Vedanta can be expressed in so many ways. But the one which I am most familiar with, the one I teach, is the non-dual variety of the non-dual flavor of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, non-dual school, taught in a more, I would say, a wider, more liberal sense, mediated through Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. So there, it's a quest from that we do not really know what we are. This is one variety of spirituality. Spirituality can come in different flavors. One way of classifying it would be, there is the most common variety of spirituality, which is the quest for God. That there is some ultimate reality, there is God. And it's not just a question of believing in God. God can be found and experienced. So you start with faith and you proceed through faith, love, devotion, surrender, prayer, worship. Indians, in Vedanta, we have a word for it. It's called bhakti, the path of devotion and surrender. And you see, that's the predominant kind of spirituality you find in the theistic religions of the world. The Christian, Islamic, Judaic traditions are almost heavily or entirely bhakti. So is Zoroastrianism. So also is in Hinduism a wide variety of bhakti traditions. In Vaishnavism, in Shaktaism, in Shaivism, all these traditions are bhakti traditions. Now there is another brand of spirituality, which is another flavor, another paradigm, if you will, of spirituality. Not belief, but actual experience, a more empirical approach. This is what the young student Narendranath Datta in the late 19th century in Calcutta went on asking, have you seen God? So this quest for mystical experience of God. So this is what you might call the mystical path, the path of yoga, for example. And by that I mean Patanjali Yoga, the Yoga Sutras. They don't start off by telling you you have to believe and then pray and worship. No. They start off by telling you cessation of the movements of the mind is yoga. And once the mind is calmed in samadhi, the deepest absorption, you realize your true nature. And that realization of your true nature sets you free. So there's an entirely empirical path and completely different paradigm. It's no accident that Vivekananda, when he came to teach Vedanta in the West in 1890s, in 1893 to Chicago, then 1894 here, where I am in the Vedanta Society of New York. The first book that he translated, commented upon and translated into English was Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And it's a classic now, Raja Yoga, Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. But it's an empirical paradigm of religion, that you can actually experience God through mystical experience. This is the third paradigm of religion which I am talking about, is the non-dual approach, which is a philosophical experiential investigation. Not at all the faith-based approach, not at all the meditative, inwardization, mystical approach, but more of a rational inquiry into our everyday experience, leading to a direct intuitive grasp of the truth. So all of these different approaches are there. In this approach, the one I'm talking about, the paradigm is that we do not know what we are, and by an investigation, we come to realize what we are, and that constitutes enlightenment or God realization. That will give you deep, lasting meaning in life, that will take you across beyond suffering, and that constitutes enlightenment.
And so as you're talking about, and these different approaches to be able to realize God through these different paths, and this uber concept of moksha and freedom, liberation, from the path that we're here, the question that keeps coming up for me in all of this is, what's the purpose of the illusion, per se? We say, this very real seeming illusion. Yes, we're here and we can follow these different paths to attain liberation. But I'm like, why did God send me here to begin with? Like, come on, we could have just been happy all along.
Sure. Um, yeah, I think the most satisfactory answer to that would be yeah. See, there are different answers. But I'll give you the most satisfactory one, which convinces me actually. The answer is God didn't send me here. Nobody sent us here. We are, from an Advaitic perspective, you are Brahman, and we are in error about our real nature, and the way out, or what we have to do right now, is to overcome error and ignorance by knowledge. But if one asks, why did the error at all come? Why did the ignorance at all come? I mean, we could have all been perfectly enlightened and just been Brahman. And the answer there would be, again, strictly speaking, logically speaking, didn't come. The only reality that exists is Brahman. And when we become aware of that, we'll realize nothing has ever really happened. And that sounds crazy, but in one sense, it's always the movie screen. It's not a tragedy, it's not a comedy, it's not a science fiction or an action thriller. It's a movie screen, and which is true. And then why such movies? Why the tragedies and the horror and the comedies?
Right.
Well, that's what a movie screen does. The answer in Gaudapada, one of the ancient texts of non-dual Vedanta, is that this is the very nature of that shining entity. This is the shining of Brahman, the universe shining forth. One can push further. Why at all this shining forth? Why at all in this way? The classic answer in Vedanta, of course, would be Maya, that which projects the reality as appearance. And in the appearance, you have all this, but the reality is still perfect. But one could still ask, why Maya at all? Why couldn't the reality just be what it is? And the answer here would be, Vivekananda answers this, is it turns the question upon itself. It says the question is wrong. Now you might say, why is this question wrong? In a deep philosophical, one can still persist, you can say, why is the question wrong? It sounds like a perfectly good question to me. So then it took me some time to understand why the question is wrong. It's because when you ask a question, what is it that we are expecting? We're asking, why is the ultimate reality appearing as samsara, this problem? Or why is there an illusion? Or if you say it's all ignorance, why is there ignorance at all? Or if you put it even more philosophically, it's Brahman appearing as the universe. Well, why is Brahman appearing as the universe? So we want an answer to the question, why? But what is this question? Why implies we are implicitly accepting causality. See, why is a cause question. This has happened. It's white all around. Why? Because it snowed. Why? Because the temperatures fell and the precipitation froze and became snow. And so you are asking for a cause of, you see the effect and you reason back to the cause. But Brahman is actually beyond causality. Even causality is included in the definition of Maya. Maya is time, space, and causation. It's like, let's put it this way. If somebody asks, what was there before time? You'll say the question is wrong, my friend, because the moment you say before, you have already accepted time. Before and after are time words. If somebody asks, what's there outside space? You'll say the question is wrong. The whole concept of inside and outside already assumes space. So outside space doesn't make sense. Before time doesn't make sense. And similarly, the why of causation, you're literally asking why of why. That doesn't make sense. So Brahman is not causally connected with this universe. But yes, Brahman is the reason why this universe shines forth. Practically speaking, if you ask this question to a monk in the Himalayas, this is an actual answer they gave. They will say that, don't seek to establish ignorance. Destroy ignorance through knowledge. That doesn't sound as good as it does in Hindi. The original Hindi is, अज्ञान को सिद्ध मत कीजिए महात्मा जी, अज्ञान को काटिए. Don't establish ignorance. Cut down ignorance, O monk. If you could think about it. If you could find a solid reason why samsara exists, if it was a logical explanation, then it would be logical and real. The whole argument here is that we are living in error. And in error, the only thing to do is first to get out of that error and then look back. And notice, those we consider enlightened, whether in whichever tradition, they don't seem to have this problem anymore. We have this question on this side of enlightenment, but we don't have an answer. And they have the answer on the other side of enlightenment, but they don't seem to have a question.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're saying is, if we want better answers, we need to ask ourselves better questions.
Or become enlightened first. And then you will notice that, the question was not rightly put anyway.
So I believe you're talking of vichara, which is the practice of self-inquiry. For our list,
before don't forget the question. Hold on to the question. Let me just make 2 points quickly before we get to the question. One point is that we'll just make 1 point. Is that all of this, one of the beauties is, all of this is actually real and practical, and thousands of people across thousands of years have walked down this path. I wouldn't say this path, multiple paths. So spirituality has been an ongoing concern of human beings. That's so nice to know that it's not an academic theory, or it's not just the latest theory developed by a scientist or a philosopher, some amount of speculation. No, it's actually a broad, well-traveled highway. So yes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that adds even more flavor to the question of vichara, of self-inquiry. So I'm wondering for our listeners, because we can sit here as practitioners, and this is what we made. Nitin and I are deep practitioners and yogis. This is your path. We have different experiences maybe than the average listener. We've touched enlightenment, we've touched these deeper spaces, which to me can be too big of a jump for someone starting on their path of, we'll just become enlightened. So my question is, what are the questions that our listeners can start to ask themselves in order to go down the path that you're referring to?
Yes. Taking one step back, the question you asked me, why all this at all? I gave you one answer, that is from the non-dual perspective. So that is also the highest and it might sound very abstract kind of answer. But remember, in Vedanta is a broad spectrum kind of approach. There are multiple schools of Vedanta. So you will get different answers if you ask different practitioners, different schools. So just for the sake of some flavor, the other answers you can expect is, why does God make us go through all this? One answer would be, this is the play of God. It's the Leela answer, a divine play. And we are playing with God. Somebody said, it might be play to God, but it's death for us. And the answer would be, it is not really death for us. We do not actually die. At no point are we destroyed. Even when the bodies die, we still exist. We go on. That's one answer, the Leela divine play answer. There's another answer, that all of this is actually meant for our eventual enlightenment. We go through any number of experiences. This is actually a very ancient answer. It goes back to one of the most ancient philosophies, Sankhya. So there, the paradigm is that nature and consciousness, they don't even talk about God. There are two things. We are sentient beings, we are conscious beings, aware, and there's material nature. And material nature is not only the physical nature, but also our inner mental, the minds which we have. And nature is like a mother who is giving these sentient beings experience. And experience is worldly experience and liberation, both of these kinds of experiences. So that's another answer to the question, why is all this there? For our experience. Now, all of these answers have limitations. Divine play, experience, whatever you call it. Or it's just causality, cause and effect. All of this is there because of our past karma. And our past karma was in some earlier universe, which was caused by an earlier past karma. And if you ask, where did it all begin? So you can see each of these answers has its own limitation. So the questions we need to ask ourselves is that, is this all? Whatever we have got in life, whatever is yet in front of us, Is this all? Even if we achieve all our goals, remember what the philosopher Zizek said. We will be continuously reminded that we basically were dreaming about things which we didn't want, which is a sad way of looking at life. So what is it? Is this all? This is one question to ask. Does God exist? We don't know which question will, evoke a response from which personality. When different kinds of persons, mental constitution, something will evoke a response. Is this real, that God realization is possible? Does God exist? Who am I? This is another question to ask. Who am I? What am I? Is death final? That's another question. What is all this? Not in the encyclopedic sense of all the disciplines of human knowledge. No, give me one answer to what is all this. What's going on here? That's another big question.
That was probably the quick thing I was asking myself, in those early college years, walking out one of the philosophy classes. And I was like, I kind of almost see the entire trajectory of life ahead of me. I'm going to go through college, I'm going to work, I'm going to get married at some point, have some kids, buy a house, so on and so forth. And I'm like, am I just meant to go play this play and play it the best I can? It feels so predictable.
Yes.
And it was like, what is all this? Like, why am I even here?
Just what I felt when I looked around parents, aunts, people around me. If I go down that path, as I said, this is what I'll be. I'll maybe a little better than them, a little worse off than them. And it's only illusion which tells us I'll be something tremendously different. You could be, but most likely you wouldn't be. You'd probably repeat the same story all over again. So these are all questions. Who am I? Is there a God? Is there a point to all this? What is all this? So these are questions, and these are all questions from the Upanishads, by the way. What is there after death? In the Katha Upanishad, the little boy Nachiketa asks the god of death, what's there after death? In the Mundaka Upanishad, the student asks the master, sir, teach me that one thing by knowing which I can know everything. What is all this, the secret of all this? In the Kena Upanishad, the student asks the master, I am seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, doing things. What is it within me that's expressing itself in all these ways? A question about consciousness, basically. So these are deep questions. The question about fulfillment, happiness. I would like to know before I jump into life, what will actually fulfill me? What is the best thing I could be doing in life? Or questions about morality. What's the right thing to do? What should I do in life? A goal of life. So these are multiple questions one could ask to begin the spiritual quest. Though I think most people who are listening to this are already on the spiritual quest. But it's good that we are on the spiritual quest. And not to be fanatic about it, but I am coming more and more to this understanding that for me, maturity is spirituality. If you have a spiritual quest in whatever form, whatever religion, then you are mature. Until then, well, just go through life and quickly, and don't waste time. If you think that you have other things to be achieved, well, do it, take a look, and sit back and think.
Yeah, there was something one of my teachers told me a long time ago, which I didn't understand at the time, but I do now. She had said, wait until you've been on the spiritual path for about 10 years and you'll start to understand these questions more deeply that you're asking now. And I think what she was referring to, and Swamiji, probably the same thing as you, it's the spiritual maturity. And I don't think that gets talked about enough in our society of how quickly we want things. But I found personally that it does require time and continued effort and a sense of fearlessness to know I'm going to keep pushing through when things get tough and things get hard and have that faith. But now I get it. I've been almost practicing yoga for 20 years. And it's like, I get that question I was asking 15 years ago, or I get that question I was asking 10 years ago. And I'm sure in 10 years or 15 years, I'll start to understand the questions I'm asking myself now. So I really love that if we can give ourselves some more space and grace with these questions and remove the timeline, I find it actually helps me get to those answers quicker. I wonder if you found that as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned 10 years because I remember our initial training is for about 10 years, 9 to 10 years. We wear white and then we take the final vows and become a monk, a Swami, so and so. But before that, we are called a brahmachari or a novice, a spiritual novice. So in my early years of being a novice, I remember asking this old monk, why is this like this? Why is that? I've forgotten what the questions were. And he said to me, hush, shh. I said, what? He said, shh, young monk, shh. He says, complete your course. That means complete the 10 years. Become a monk first. Then start asking questions. Your questions have no value right now. And so keep your mouth shut, eyes and ears open, learn. 10 years later, if you still have the questions, you can still ask. So, yes, give ourselves time. There's a couple of points I want to make here. One is the old Zen story of eager young student going to the Zen master and says, how long will it take me to become enlightened? And the Zen master said, if you work really hard at this, it'll take you 20 years. 20 years? What if I work really, really hard, twice as hard every day? And he said, then it'll take you 40 years. so, yes, this very idea, I'm going to cut it short. No, don't do that. And also, what happens nowadays, one problem of this age is instant gratification that has speeded up now, thanks to this wonderful new technology. That's one reason. And also general affluence, an affluent society where our wants are gratified. Amazon Prime will deliver whatever you want within 24 hours. It's one of the ancient descriptions of heaven, which we find in Hindu and Buddhist and Jain scriptures, that your wishes are instantly gratified. And those are this otherworldly heavens. They are not particularly spiritual. We are living in some sort of a heaven we have created for ourselves, especially if you have some amount of money and if you are plugged into this modern world. But then this is damaging for spirituality. It creates a mindset which wants quick gratification. And so quick, instant nirvana, instant enlightenment, which is utterly impossible. And even if we protest and say, no, I don't want that. I'm in for it, for enlightenment, for the long haul. But somewhere inside it works. That kind of psychology works. And it works in ways like it makes us unhappy suddenly, inexplicably unhappy or impatient with what we are doing. So let's not do that. Another way it works is by making us hop, skip and jump from one path to the other, one teacher to the other, one tradition to the other, because it's like a supermarket of spirituality out there. When 25 years, 50 years or 100 years back, it was mostly the religion or the path which our community had, what you grew up with, what was available around you, and you followed that. Now almost everything is available to you. At least the books are available, the talks are now available. Yeah. In many cases, the teachers and many traditions have become liberal and they're open to everybody. So what happens is people try one thing and then within months or years go on to another thing and another thing and then give it all up. So Sri Ramakrishna had this parable of the man who was digging for water, and he dug a well in one place. It's hard work digging a well, got exhausted. Somebody said, why don't you try there? So he started digging a second hole. At the end of the day, he had dug 6 shallow holes and found water nowhere. He might have found water in the first place he was digging. All of these paths we are following, every path. There's a Christian mystic path, there is an Islamic mystic path, there is multiple paths in Buddhism, Hinduism. All of these paths are proven to work because each of them have generated mystics and spiritual masters and produced saints over the centuries and millennia. You just have to stick to it. And at the very least, if I would say to people who can't do that, who need to move on, one thing one must not move on from is the spiritual quest. That one must not give up. Yeah. If you do give up, the Hindus have this dire warning for you because you're just going to come back to it in some later life. So why not stick to it now?
I heard a quote one time. It was referring to the spiritual path. It said, better to have never started than to have started and not finished.
Yes.
that always stuck with me on the times I wanted to quit. And Nathan, I'm sure you have a question coming, but real quick, I was talking to a friend at a party a month or two ago, and we were talking about discipline. And it was like we were speaking two different languages. She's like, well, I don't understand. Why do you need discipline? I go, well, it teaches me to stay with things when they're tough. I take a cold shower every day for 2 years straight. And she's like, that's just crazy. You don't want to do it? I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't like it, but I do it because it's training my mind to continue on a path. And it was like we were speaking two different languages, which I thought was so funny and cute. Her going like, I don't understand why you're doing things to yourself you don't like or don't enjoy. But I think some of that is around that instant gratification of not giving yourself what you want all the time, and understanding that discipline is required on this path to spiritual enlightenment and happiness.
Yeah, don't torture yourself unnecessarily. But if it's something that you value, you clearly do value spirituality. It's the most important thing in our lives. So in that case, it's worth going through that. As the Bhagavad Gita says, Krishna makes this distinction. There is the sattvic pleasure and there is the rajasic pleasure. The sattvic, the pure, the serene, the holy, they're not necessarily holy, but at least pure and elevated and refined. There he says, it's like poison in the beginning, but it's like nectar in the end. And all kinds of knowledge, skill, and certainly spirituality, whether it's devotion, whether it's meditation, whether it's self-inquiry, all of them are like that. It might be fascinating at the very beginning, but once you plunge into it, whatever you're trying to pick up, it could be music, it could be martial arts, could be philosophy, whatever it is, very soon it's hard work and drudgery. And so it's like poison in the beginning, but if you hold on to it, the result is like nectar. And the rajasic pleasure, the other kind of pleasure, is like nectar in the beginning and poison in the end. So instant gratification in the beginning, and then just dissipation, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth afterwards. It's just any kind of instant gratification does that. Modern positive psychology also points to it. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote this wonderful book, Flow. I would really recommend it to people. It says that the best moments of our lives, the highest quality of life, is when we are intensely engaged in a worthwhile pursuit. Intensely engaged in a worthwhile pursuit. So attention, concentration, and a high goal in life. And those are the best times of our lives. And he says that passive pleasure, consumption, mass media, and just mindless internet browsing or watching TV, whatever it is, that is very quickly, it is dissatisfactory and it sort of disintegrates the soul. And anybody who goes through that will feel it very soon.
Right before the show, I was mentioning to Nick how Friday night I went out with some friends and stayed out a little too late. And the next day it was so tough to meditate. In fact, I didn't. I had to skip. And I was recovering from that night out. And there was while I was there, I had a fun time. But the afterwards, I was like, I don't want this. It's like there's this dual struggle. And so actually often the answer that resonates with me the most, of all the answers we talk about, like what's the purpose of all this and the illusion and etc. It does seem like there is a deeply embedded principle trying to teach us, trying to help grow us.
Yes.
There's often the saying that this is a school.
Right.
We're meant to learn our lessons. We're meant to grow and expand in that way. And I find that every time I go through some of the things that are tough, the things that seem like poison in the beginning, but nectar at the end, it leads to a more expansive state, a higher degree of happiness, sustained peace, enjoyment, great relationships. It leads to so many good things.
Absolutely.
Even in the world of investing, I learned this. You put money away to invest today, it leads to greater returns in the future, which gives you financial foundations to be able to build something great upon that. So it's so many principles
Absolutely.
are present on that path. So definitely one path that, one school of thought that has resonated with me throughout life to date and likely will continue to is just we are growing as people. When we do lean into our edges and those things that are uncomfortable, we grow as people, we grow as individuals, and we grow spiritually if we're committed to the spiritual path as well.
Right.
One question that sort of is maybe dances around that came up. And Nick and I were actually texting back and forth last week about this, and I was like, Nick, it seems like we're born with faulty minds. Like we go in meditation, we're witnessing our mind of what are its tendencies and what are thoughts and different streams of going in the past or going into the future that's popping up. And even Swamiji, as you were leading us through the meditation today, and you said, hey, try not to go in the past or don't try to see things. And even especially when you said don't expect anything, merely connecting with the stillness. There was something to that. But the question I was wondering was, maybe there is like a karmic cycle, but it seems like we're trying to overcome lots of tendencies of our innate mind, trying to realize some of these truths that, oh, maybe I should lean into some of those things that seem tough because they eventually give me nectar. But that's something we grow into and realize and still realizing. So I'm curious your thought on that. Like, are we born with faulty minds? Is that the right way to think about it? Is that the wrong question to be asking?
No, it's a good question. And once you try to take charge of this body-mind equipment, you realize how difficult it is. It's not that we are born with faulty minds. It's just the equipment we have got. This body-mind is very sophisticated, is very powerful, and it has not been cultivated. It has not been trained. That's all that there is to it. And worse, not cultivated, not trained, but also damaged by us through careless handling. So a lot of tendencies have developed over time through careless living. Right now in this lifetime, and if you're a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Jain or a Sikh, you will say through multiple lifetimes, we have poured inadvertently, we have poured garbage into this mind, and so the tendencies have set up unconsciously, which we have set up in this uncultivated mind. This is what we have to struggle with right now. Also, in an even more deeper sense, you're right. Damaged or faulty mind is almost the language of the Upanishads. In the Kathopanishad, there is a mantra, Paranchikhani Vyatrinat Swayambhu. The Lord has permanently damaged our mind and senses. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, because, in what sense? Because they flow outwards. Tasmat parang pashyanti nantaratman. Our senses and minds are permanently focused outwards into the world, and therefore we do not see what's behind them or what's our innermost reality. And of course, that's sort of tongue-in-cheek, because the senses and mind are doing exactly what they've been designed to do. The mind is meant to think and feel and judge and remember and decide, expect, love and hate. That's what the mind does. And the senses are meant to see, hear, smell, taste, touch. That's what the senses do. But we haven't cultivated it. And that's why this struggle is there. In every spiritual path, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna raises this exact same question when Krishna teaches Arjuna to meditate in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna's first reaction is, you can see him shrugging and says, it won't work. It won't work. He literally tells Krishna, what you have taught me is useless. Why? He says, because the mind is restless. He says, you might as well try to catch hold of the wind. That's literally what Arjuna says to Krishna. And then Krishna's answer is, you are right. However, it's not hopeless. He says, by detachment and consistent practice, abhyasa vairagya, detachment and consistent practice, one can tame the mind, one can train the mind, make the mind serene and pure and a friend. The Gita, Krishna says there in the Gita that this mind is your friend, your best friend, your worst enemy. The uncultivated mind is our worst enemy. The cultivated and trained mind is our best friend. It's very powerful equipment. We let Vivekananda have the last word. He says the mind as it is now, he compares it to a monkey which is naturally restless, and now the monkey is drunk. Imagine its restlessness. And now the monkey has been stung by a scorpion. Imagine the craziness of the monkey. And finally possessed by a ghost. Imagine what the monkey would be doing, and our minds are perpetually like that. So, but the task is not impossible. And it's not an all or nothing. As we go on in this path, as we meditate, as we repeat the mantra, as we chant, as we practice stillness, as we practice service, all of these things become easier over time. And the benefits are also incremental. You keep getting the benefits from day to day. One professor asked me that enlightenment seems to be a very far off goal. So why would anybody enter this path at all? He's a professor of philosophy. And then he himself gave the answer. He said, not so much for the ultimate nirvana or moksha. It's because people get benefit from spiritual life day to day. That's why they keep coming back again. They get benefit from meditation, from scriptural study, from devotion, from service, from all of that. And they get this benefit and they feel it. That gives strength to them. It gives meaning to their lives. So they keep coming back.
I
Thank you.
really like that aspect of continuing to show up for yourself, for your practice, and that you will reap the benefits and the rewards, and they will keep coming. It's almost like every.
Nick,
am I back? Am I frozen?
Let's see if Nick comes back in a second. You're good. You're back.
Okay.
You're back.
Yeah, I was just saying, I love that idea of continuing to move forward and continuing to receive the benefits, one day at a time, one step at a time, one meditation at a time, and the power in practice, the power in sadhana. And it's shown true in my life, and I know for both of you as well. I love that conversation.
That a friend of yours who said, why would you do something which you don't like? Well, she has a point, because we also must enjoy the process.
Mm-hmm.
The ultimate goal is, yes, it's bliss, it's peace, it's transcendence of suffering. But meditation is also it is fulfilling. Service is fulfilling. Devotion is it makes you happy. One of the teachers said, do you want to be happy immediately? Yes. Do you want to be happy immediately and lastingly? Yes. And maximally happy? Yes. And he says, fall in love with God. Fall in love with God. So that is the experience of the devotional path in all religions. It immediately love makes you happy. Human love, that makes you happy. If you're genuinely in love with somebody, it could even could be your partner, could be your kids, could be your dog. That gives you that much happiness. But if you fall in love with God genuinely, so from internally, even if you simulate that love, it immediately gives you happiness and continues to give you happiness.
Yeah, and I've noticed that, as my meditations continue to deepen, and Swami, I've been on the path maybe genuinely, dedicatedly for the last 5 years when I committed to and became a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. So I probably got 5 more years, of Guruji saying, hold your questions, cultivate your spirituality. But I genuinely connect with that essence of there is a deepening happiness and a feeling of bliss and contentment and peace as I'm able to more and more create that peace internally.
Yes.
As the monkey mind settles, and as continue to gain tools and strength to settle whenever it does tend to run away.
And tell you what else will I do? If it comes to, for a long time, sometimes spiritual practices might become dry without any, juice to it. It just seems to be mechanical. Good. You can still say that, what else am I going to do? This is the best thing that I found. Tell the mind, show me one thing that's better. Show me one thing that's greater. What does all the literature of the world say? All the philosophical, spiritual literature. Take a survey of human history. You are following the highest thing that human civilization has come up with, the spiritual quest for God. So even if it's mechanical, just do it mechanically. Spare a little bit of your time and energy in life for it. But the point I was making is, don't try to power through it for too long. At one point, bring it to the mind's notice that you are enjoying this. There was this psychologist, I think Tal Ben-Shahar. He had this course on happiness. He wrote this book. I forgot the name of the book, but he made the point that the most beneficial kind of practice to do in life is something that you like and it's nourishing. So he gave the example of food. There is food which is really tasty, but very harmful for your body, so it harms your health. There is food which is really good for you, but utterly tasteless, and you don't like eating it at all. And there is the worst kind, which is utterly tasteless and also harmful for your body. But then there is food which is tasty and nutritious and nourishing for your body. And so that's the kind of food one should aim for. Similarly, in life, things like spiritual practice, for example, or exercise, or whatever is good for you, find that balance which you enjoy and is nourishing. One can indulge oneself and have fun for a short while, but it's damaging to one's psychological life and ultimately not fulfilling at all. One could power through with a very great amount of discipline and do good and difficult things, but it's very difficult to make it last. But the really good balance is do the practices and eventually, at least in the long run, make sure that you really want to do them. It's if you were given the choice, you would not give it up. You would rather hold on to it.
Yeah.
Like that. Maybe the title will be Making Spirituality Tasty and Nutritious. That could be our title for the
Tal Ben-Shahar. I wonder what the name of the book was. It's a very popular book.
Well, Swami, this has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything you'd like to leave us or leave the listeners with as some last wisdom to impart upon all of us before we close this out?
Let me share the insight from Vivekananda. He, the path itself. Again, a broad picture of the path. All kinds of spiritual practices he broadly classified into his famous 4 yogas. And so there is the yoga of service, karma yoga. There's the yoga of love or devotion, bhakti yoga. And there's the yoga of meditation, raja yoga. And the yoga of knowledge, this is self-knowledge, what I normally talk about, the non-dual path, jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. And Vivekananda's recommendation was, he acknowledged by any one of these paths, one can become enlightened. And people have followed these paths. These paths are available in their variety of forms in various religions of the world. But his special recommendation was, have a harmony of all 4 in your lives. Since we are able to work, do put in some, let us put in some altruistic work, be of use to others. This is of great psychological satisfaction, and karma wise, it's the greatest blessing of having sacrificed for others and of having been of use to others. And then and in an unmotivated way, without looking for anything in return at all. The second one would be to acknowledge, if you have faith in God, there are many who do not have faith in God. They can still be spiritual. There are paths which are not theistic. But if you do have faith in God, in a higher power, you're blessed. And so cultivate that inwardly, even without any outward show. Cultivate a deep, loving awareness of God's presence within. It's true. Initially, you might say that's just belief. Yes, it is just belief. But it's on very good grounds. It's on grounds of thousands of years of religious and spiritual development across the world. The third one is the meditative path. Spend time in deep quietness. Good works are good. Love of God, thinking about God is good. Repeating a mantra is good. At one time, shut it all down. Even the best of thoughts, the best of activities, just retreat back into as much stillness as one can. I remember this poem by, I think, Emily Dickinson. It says about solitude. And she says that there's a solitude of the sailor on the seas, just the vast ocean, and you're alone. Imagine one person on a little boat in the ocean. Then she says, there's a deeper solitude, the solitude of, she goes on like this, the solitude of death. A beloved person has died, and you sit quietly with the person who has passed away, in the presence of death at that moment. The one was there, beloved, you shared a life, and then the person is just gone. There's a solitude there. There's a quietness and silence there. But then she makes the point. She says, all of these are company and noise, All of these solitude and silence is like noise compared to that polar solitude of a soul turned into itself. So when we turn inwards in deep meditation, in that stillness, be still and know I am God. And then the inquiry into ourselves, the greatest of these Upanishadic inquiries is, who am I? What am I? If one were to ask me to summarize it, in one phrase, it would be selfless, not selfish. That's Karma Yoga. Devotion, not desire. That's Bhakti Yoga. Concentration, not distraction. That's Raja Yoga. And self-knowledge, not other knowledge. That's Jnana Yoga. That's the harmony of the 4 yogas.
Wow, what a beautiful way to finish, and so many things to think about and put together and practice into our lives and put into our lives. Thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge. I know Nathan and I have both grown tremendously from it. We really appreciate it. For those of you listening, please make sure to share this if you found it helpful, and like and subscribe on YouTube as well. And Swamiji, what's the best way for our listeners to follow you, or the best way for them to learn from you if they'd like that?
Follow you or learn from you going forward?
Oh, I guess just look it up online. If you're in New York, do come to the Vedanta Society of New York. We are right here, between just next to Central Park in the Upper West. And but otherwise, I'm pretty easy to find on YouTube, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah. One thing I would recommend is, if you're interested in Advaita Vedanta, it's good to listen to lectures. That's great. But it's good to study a text. I have taught a few texts. These are small introductory texts like Vedanta Sara, the essence of Vedanta, Aparoksha Anubhuti, the direct experience. And then there is also Atma Bodha, Advaita Makaranta. These are all small texts. And I've taught the texts verse by verse. It's good to, the books are very cheap. Get the book with the translation, listen to the classes. You go away with having a solid gain, and not just a single lecture off the cuff, but an actual complete text. And then go to the original texts. The original texts are the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. There's a Brahma Sutra, but primarily, if anybody wants one text of Vedanta, it would be the Bhagavad Gita. And if you want to go to the sources of the Bhagavad Gita, it would be the Upanishads.
Right here. It's been on my counter all day today. There we go.
Yes.
I'll have to check into it. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for listening. And namaste to everyone.
Thank you.